On this Earth Day edition of 219 West, cars, congestion, cabbies, and a driver who paid the ultimate price. And that distinctive Big Apple accent.
No more, no more. No more accents.
How some New Yorkers are saying, forget about it. Plus, black slang. Words once heard mainly in African American communities are now common in popular culture. Welcome to 219 West. I'm Alexandra Semenova.
And I'm Shari Straker. Earth Day, it's celebrated globally on April 22nd to promote the health of the planet and by extension the people who live on it. Earth Day was started in 1970 to raise awareness about pollution, toxic waste, and other factors harmful to the environment. People around the world commemorate Earth Day by participating in activities like recycling, planting trees, and cleaning up parks. In New York City, traffic will be banned on streets across the boroughs on the day before the official event. On April 21st, Broadway will be closed from Times Square to 14th Street for a day without cars.
Midtown Manhattan permanently without cars, or at least a limited number, is a scenario that's been proposed by some politicians and environmental activists. But with ridership on public transportation down and the number of for-hire vehicles up, a solution to traffic problems has been elusive. There's been talk of measures like congestion pricing, alternate day travel days, and stiffer licensing regulations. But New Yorkers who rely on cars to make their living say they feel left out of the discussion. An increase in competition and decrease in wages has left them struggling to make ends meet. Eliana Perez has the story of one driver and his last act of desperation.
Douglas grew up in Brooklyn, New York. When he was about 20 years old, Douglas became a driver, professional driver. And he pretty much stayed in that field for his entire life. He had enjoyed the travel and a lot of the things he's seen. Plus, he didn't like having a boss over him, right? Like everybody else.
Douglas was a livery car driver for over 40 years. He was also a troubled man. In 2005, he had to borrow money from his family to pay for surgeries from an injury. He struggled to make enough money when he went back to work, and then the Great Recession hit. Doug was also diagnosed with cancer in 2013. With treatment, he was able to return to work, but his pain and hardship continued.
Here on February 5th, Douglas Shifter shot himself in front of City Hall, calling out city officials for allowing the congestion of the taxi industry to worsen.
In response, Mayor de Blasio cited mental health issues, but other drivers understand how Doug could have been pushed over the brink.
I mean, he's definitely not going to go in vain, because, everybody knew what he stood for.
Aziz has been an app share driver for 3 years and is a steward for the Independent Drivers Guild, which represents over 60,000 for-hire vehicles in the city.
He really expressed, all the frustrations that every single driver actually is feeling right now. He's mounted to a level where he could no longer take it.
Over the past 5 years, the number of cabs has increased nearly threefold to about 150,000. Yellow cabs are capped at roughly 13,500. The remaining cabs are for-hire vehicles that include black cars, livery cars, luxury limousines, and app-based ride companies like Uber. Since 2013, these cars have been entering the industry at an accelerated rate, creating much competition for original taxi drivers.
Part of the despair that Doug was referring to was the fact that we don't have the ability to shut the door on new vehicles coming in.
Alan Frongberg is Deputy Commissioner of Public Affairs at the Taxi and Limousine Commission, TLC.
So in terms of that, there's really nothing to enforce. We process them, we issue them when they're eligible, but the TLC doesn't have a mechanism, a legislative enabling mechanism to limit the number of vehicles and people that come into the system.
Members of the City Council's new committee on for-hire vehicles addressed the problem with new proposals. Committee Chair Ruben Diaz Sr. proposed a $2,000 fee on each vehicle and suggested restricting drivers to single bases. The Independent Drivers Guild has its own solutions. The group gathered about 16,000 signatures to send a petition to the TLC for pay protection and a cap on the number of issued licenses.
Lawmakers, sit down, craft something with lobbyists, or the app-based companies to their advantage. And we're going to wake up, there is a rule change. But we are the heart of this industry. So why we shouldn't have a voice?
In 2016, Uber reached an agreement with the Machinists Union to form an association of drivers, the IDG.
IDG cannot raise labor violations. They can't, they can't move without Uber giving them the order. It's Uber trying to win itself cover in the midst of this crisis.
Historian Graham Hodges says New York has grappled with similar issues years past.
I think that today's situation is somewhat similar to the 1920s, when there was no regulation, when you had a new technological innovation, cars. The automobile companies dumped a lot of cars onto the streets of the cities, and this created congestion. It created fluctuating fares, created a lot of accidents, created a situation where there were a lot of part-timers. Somewhat similar today. I think actually today is worse.
Douglas, our brother, there'll never be another. Douglas, our brother.
What we started to see on the news with regard to the vigils from his peers, that was a part of Douglas that the family really didn't know. And I didn't know that he reached so many people. I don't even think Douglas knew that he was reaching so many people. His death started an avalanche that hopefully, will help the drivers get what they need in the industry. And that is fair play. Get the politicians out of it. Get treated with respect from the Taxi Limousine Commission. That's just in the city. But there are issues that are universal throughout every city around the world.
For 219 West, I'm Eliana Perez.
Producer Avery Miles sat down with transportation policy expert Bruce Schaller to talk about what's at the core of some of these issues.
Last Friday, there was another driver suicide. This time it was a yellow cab medallion owner. And he didn't make as big a splash as Doug Shifter did. But what do you think about that?
Well, it's obviously a very tragic event. It's a tragedy for the person, the family, the friends of the individual. When you sort of take a step back and start saying what's the takeaway in kind of a broader industry way, it obviously highlights, the pressures and strains that are on drivers, whether they're yellow cab drivers or black car, or Uber or Lyft or car service and the like. And so this is a set of issues that's getting raised more and more in New York and across the country, internationally even. And it turns out to be a very difficult problem to solve. And the reason it's difficult is that it's an open system, so drivers can come in and out easily, which is good. In fact, historically, it's one of the benefits of the taxi industry is if you need to go make some money, it's pretty straightforward to do that. The flip side is that the people are willing to work for a certain amount of money per day or per hour. It varies depending on the individual, but it sort of averages out if you look at this as averages. And when business goes up, more people show up to work. When business goes down, fewer people show up to work. Mm-hmm. So if you raise the wage somehow, you'll get more people working and kind of offset that.
How do you see caps on licenses?
I don't think caps are effective. I think that's what you saw with the medallion cap going back many decades, is that the effect of the cap was all the yellow cabs work in Manhattan, and then the boroughs had no service. That's what gave rise to the car service industry. If you put a cap on Uber and Lyft, where would the drivers go? They go to the most congested parts of Manhattan in the most congested times of the day. And then if you're in Eastern Queens, you wouldn't be able to obtain a ride when you need one. And you'd have history would repeat itself.
So then, to sum up, what would be the best solution?
Overall solution, I think congestion pricing is very important, both the fee on the general public driving into Manhattan, and then an hourly fee on taxi and for hire drivers, and also I proposed that for commercial vehicles, trucks, because the same sorts of rationale applies to them. And then on the industry side, in the longer term, we're going to need to have some sort of convergence of all these different industry segments. They're all, at this point, serving the same set of customers in only slightly different ways. And so you have more vehicles than you need on crowded streets if they all had the ability to both serve trips that come through a dispatch mechanism, whether it's something you call on the phone or an app. That's one. Have some vehicles that also pick up street hails. You can have more efficiency in the use of the vehicles around town, number one. And then some type of mechanism so that drivers can make a good living.
Yeah, because it comes down to that.
Right, which is good for the drivers and good for passengers too. The thing is, there's just the low-hanging fruit that there's so many vacant vehicles. If they were vacant less, the drivers would make more.
Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Bruce.
All right, great.
When we come back, endangered dialects and Black slang, is African American culture being co-opted?
Several seasons ago, we started a series on vanishing languages. There are nearly 7,000 languages spoken worldwide, but that number is rapidly declining. Experts estimate that one language disappears every 2 weeks, and many of them are spoken in New York, one of the most linguistically diverse places in the world. But it's not just languages that are endangered here. So is the variation of English we use in New York. Dominic McKenzie accentuates the issue.
From Archie Bunker's Ever Absent R's.
And I beat 99. I beat 99 with Prince to spare. What is that shit?
To the Nanny's Jewish influenced speech patterns.
Hello, Fang Lums. Do you deliver?
To the laws that became laws. And do the right thing.
Up, wait a minute. First of all, it is too hot, all right?
But the stereotypical accent or conglomeration of accents is losing its allure. Many New Yorkers are saying, oy vey, no way.
She can scoop these things into 3 red bags, and we will go meet her Wednesday.
Janet is from Greenwich Village. She just enrolled for accent reduction lessons at New York Speech Coaching.
And my husband teased and said that the speech therapist is going to come out speaking my accent. He said, you're not going to learn a thing.
Today, Janet is working on changing the sounds of her vowels. Apparently,
down,
the trick
that's
is in the
up.
placement of the tongue.
Up, but that's down, right? The tongue can do the same thing. The front of the tongue can move fairly independent of the back of the tongue.
Brendan Hodak is a speech pathologist at New York Speech Coaching. He has worked to reduce his own accent and now helps others do the same.
Now, there you go.
I'm originally from Long Island, New York, just a few minutes outside of the city. And there is a Long Island accent, so very similar to the New York accent. There is a vanishing of the sound where it should be, and a presence of it where it shouldn't be. Water becomes wada or wada, and soda becomes soder. Another very distinctive feature is the aw sound. It's very strong, the lips are very rounded, so dog, walk my dog.
Do it again.
Hodak's reason for wanting to change his accent, the desire for his speech to correspond with his sense of self.
That New York dialect was something that, while beautiful and wonderful, did not feel a part of me. Some of those consonants are very strong, those vowels are very drawn out. My personality is not one that is very in your face or strong. Nothing wrong with those types of personalities, but I felt that my speech would be better suited if it was more neutral, more standard, less distinct.
But for some New Yorkers, the accent is an essential part of their identity. Journalist John Schumo is one of them. He began his broadcasting career in 1997, reporting on his home borough, Staten Island.
Handed up the first indictments on U.S. soil. And welcome once again to all of... So in the beginning, with no experience, I tried to sound like a reporter, mimicking the Midwestern. And the fire here in Great Kills started... That wasn't me. I was acting. The more I was me, the Italian-American kid from Staten Island, the more doors opened, the more I could talk to people and connect with them. So no one ever told me to be less me, but certainly it goes in the back of your mind. You don't want to start your career and be too New York-y.
Shumo's New York accent worked for him as a local reporter. Currently, he is a correspondent for CBS and reels it in now that he's on a national network.
No one will be anchoring the CBS Evening News with a New York accent like this. It ain't gonna happen. If I'm struggling to understand what you're saying, because your accent is so thick, that's also a problem. Whether you're from Jamaica, the island, or Jamaica, Queens, whether you're from the Deep South, or you're from the Midwest, if you want to have a broad appeal, you got to sort of tone it down a little bit and make yourself more universally accepted.
Shumo is referring to what some call a standard or middle American accent. Dr. Michael Newman is a linguistics professor at Queens College and author of New York City English. He believes there is no standard American accent. In fact, everyone has an accent, but he acknowledges that some have been stigmatized.
Some features of Southern English, you could never really get away with saying ma instead of my. And you could never really get away with saying, you know, quat instead of cot. That said, it's really hard to identify a region which we would say that has become the model.
A New York accent was once a badge of pride. When did it become such a linguistic burden? Dr. Newman says it took hold in the early 20th century with the influx of new immigrants, those huddled masses.
What happened was New York City English had been prestigious, but with the arrival of immigrants from Southern Europe and from Eastern Europe, that became less desirable because New York English became associated with them and they were looked down upon.
Newman says the different immigrant groups coming to the city have influenced the evolution of the New York accent, making it vast and varied.
Many features of New York City English, particularly our vowels, can be traced back to the first English settlers who arrived even during the Dutch period.
These groups also brought with them very specific ways of speaking.
The Irish, for example, were the ones that brought us our famous yous, like you's gotta go now, right? The plural you. And the Italians and the Jews brought us the way that we pronounce sometimes D's, T's, and S's, which is different from the way that any other English dialect pronounces them. We often pronounce them on our teeth.
Newman says there's still much to discover about the origins of New York English and its future. He is part of a CUNY team researching the topic with support from a federally funded grant. But even before the data is collected and analyzed, one thing can be concluded. Even if it's on the decline, if you think the Big Apple accent will definitely disappear anytime soon, you're a Michiganer. I'm here with Heather Quinlan, the creator of If These Knishes Could Talk, a documentary that explores this popular accent.
I don't think I have an accent. Not at all. People say I do. They say I do.
Talking some more about the film, could you summarize what your film was about?
My film is about the origin of the New York accent, what it means to have one, and is it disappearing as New York changes and in many ways becomes a safer city and a better city, but in a lot of ways becomes too wealthy. Like I always say, the pendulum swings too far the other way, and will the accent survive all the influx of wealthy people coming in?
Now, a recent study was just done about accents here in the US, and it was done with a bunch of Europeans. And they said that, well, 18% of them said that they found the New York accent the most sexiest accent in the world. What do you take on that?
Well, I did ask that question to a lot of my interviewees. I didn't put it in the film, but almost 100% it was on a man, yes, on a woman, no. And I think that's because the New York accent is a very masculine accent. I believe in that study, Southern accents rated higher, if not pretty high. And I think that can be more like a Blanche Dubois accent, a very kind of gentle, beautiful accent, whereas New York, like I said, it can be kind of street smart and gruff and all the things that go into that. So maybe by sexy they mean manly or I don't know, an accent loaded with testosterone.
I think, on that point, I'm an immigrant, and before I moved to the US, I just fell in love with the New York accent. Watching television and most of the shows that I saw that came out of the US, there was a lot of, examples of New York, especially in accents. And coming here now into New York and seeing the different people, getting to know some people from all different parts of this diverse city. Each borough has their own identity, right? Would you say that you have different accents, different variations of this New York accent coming out of these different boroughs?
It's a common misconception that there is a Brooklyn accent or a Queens accent or a Staten Island accent. It's more correct to say an Italian New York accent, again, like The Godfather, a Jewish New York accent like Woody Allen, an Irish one like, you think of Jimmy Cagney, Puerto Rican like Rosie Perez, African American like Spike Lee. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that people move around a lot. People don't stay in one building their whole lives, or people don't stay in one neighborhood their whole lives. But yeah, it's more ethnically different than it is geographic.
So you had a chance to go out into the city. You held a sign up to, I guess, attract some people to come to you. What was the question you asked on that sign? And tell me some of the things you found.
The sign was, do you have a New York accent? Then talk to me. I think people felt like the correct answer was to say they were proud of their accent. I think that has a lot to do with the fact that the communities that they live in, like attracts like. So the communities that you live in will tend, if you have a New York accent, you will tend to live in a community with a heavy New York accent.
Finally, why do you think a discussion like this is important? I mean, you did this film in 2013. Here we are a couple of years later. Why do you think it was important then, it's important now, and moving forward?
As the accent goes, and I don't believe the accent is going to disappear, what I think is going to happen is that your stereotypical speaker, like Archie Bunker or Jackie Gleason, or essentially white people, or the Jewish, Italian, Irish immigrants from way back when, have now been replaced by Asian, Russian, African. They are the people who are going to carry the New York accent.
Thank you so much, Heather, for contributing to this discussion today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
We turn from a dying dialect to a vibrant vernacular, Black slang. Slang is defined as informal words or phrases often used by a particular group of people. Linguists explain that slang is often made up of pre-existing words given entirely new meanings. Through the internet, music, and movies, Black slang has migrated from communities of color to mainstream culture and is widely used by people outside the Black experience. As Umu Fofana reports, this trend has raised some questions about cultural appropriation.
Maybe you've heard words like this.
Queer. Bye, Felicia.
Or this.
Every day we lit. Yeah, every day we lit. Yeah.
Or these. Commonly known as Black slang, Dr. Cecilia Cutler, a professor of linguistics at Lehman College, says slang has a very specific meaning for linguists. That's all about words and expressions that are hip and trendy at the moment.
Slang is always changing, and the words that were popular 20 or 30 years ago are going to be different than the words you hear now. Black slang is a really, really broad category because you're talking about people that live in many different cities who have different kinds of interests, and by and large, it's created by younger people.
Though slang words have evolved over the years, Dr. Cutler says there's a notable pattern in the grammatical form of slang expressions.
It's called invariant be or habitual be. It's not conjugated. It always stays as be. But if you use that form be, it usually always means that it's something somebody's always doing, using, or doing over and over again. So if you say something like, oh, that girl, she be tripping. It's like, that girl is always, every time I see her, or almost every time I see her, she's tripping, she's bugging out, or whatever. And that form is really, really interesting. It's really unique because you find corollaries to it in West African languages, but also in Caribbean Creole languages that have different substrates, like French substrate, English substrate, Dutch substrates. You'll find that same form.
Williamsburg Charter High School is a school in Brooklyn. Students say they adopt slang from a variety of sources.
We get our slang words from, like, it's just like in our culture, like somebody says it, like it's like a game of telephone, like it just gets passed down through people and then it wears out and there's new slang that comes in.
Whatever's catchy is where I get my slang from. Like if it's lit, if it ring a bell, I start saying it myself.
Music, artists that we look up to, or like that's trending right now, stuff
social
like that.
media.
Yeah.
A lot of it comes. And what about social media? The memes, like if a meme goes viral and it says this sentence.
Or like some of the artists, the thugs.
Vines and videos.
The slang words we get are from family, like they'll say words. We'll say it a different way from the way they said it when they were younger. So like when we'll say a word, they'll be like, oh, we use that in our day, but it had a different meaning. Like lit was different, because my dad, I remember talking to him, he told me it was when he was getting high, and now it's like partying.
There's lit, which means like active, hype. There's on site, like, oh, it's on site for you after school, like you gotta go, you know? And then clip, like it's clip for you, kind of. It's clip means kind of the same thing.
Yeah, also on mommy.
Like on mommy, like word to my mom.
Yeah, like I swear to God.
That's how serious I am, type of thing.
Dead ass. Dead ass a lot.
What kind of music do you guys listen to?
Trap, hip-hop, and R&B.
Hip-hop has been very instrumental in the creation and dissemination of slang words. Rapper Frank McFly says slang is a vital part of the music culture and encompasses everything you are, from the way you talk to the way you walk.
It's just it shows originality, you know what I mean? How you bring it up. You could make a word trendy, like Migos, make words like that way and stuff like that, you know what I mean? It brings the culture, something new to the table.
Yeah, that way, dab it the runway. Get me running to the end.
Popular slang words I use in my day is like Uggs or Bozo.
What does Uggs and Bozo?
Bozo mean like you a clown, so it goes off like Bozo the clown. Like a clown, or that's a bad move, like that was a Bozo move, you know what I mean? Uggs might mean you ugly in a good way, or Uggs could mean I care for you, it's like, it's weird kind of thing, you know what I mean? And sometimes it's more about not even using different words, shortening words, like you a weirdo.
And what
that's just like means you a weirdo, you know what I mean? But just like saying it in your own way.
Through popular culture, Black slang has become so widespread, it's now commonplace, with people outside of the Black community picking up the terms. This has led to accusations of cultural appropriation. Some people believe that cultural appropriation of Black slang is acceptable.
The appropriation of slang by white people and all types of other cultures, from like the hip-hop culture, I feel like it's a good thing, you know what I mean? It shows that we trending and we a big influence on how people move and speak, so I don't really feel no way about it, you know?
It's amazing to me how those slang expressions, those ways of talking, just really quickly, see where they come from, and then they very quickly spread out to the wider population. And people don't even realize that these expressions maybe emerged in an urban African-American community of young people who are interested in hip-hop. They just would have no clue. They think it's just part of English, you know?
Others don't.
Blonde Becky says "bay" and the room becomes a pep rally, a human wave of yeah.
Dr. Cutler believes the solution to this problem lies with people being educated on where these words originate.
With hip-hop, there's a lot more consciousness about that kind of appropriation. But ultimately, you know, it's each individual person has to kind of go through this journey of figuring out where things come from and how to pay respect and how to kind of understand their position vis-a-vis a cultural form. And I think slang will always be with us. Slang is part of our culture. Slang is the way that young people say, I'm going to come up with a better, funnier, quicker way of saying something. So it will always be with us. The terms that you hear nowadays will be different in 10 years, in 5 years, in 3 years. I mean, I think what's interesting is that process seems to be speeding up as people have a greater ability to connect with each other through social media, for example.
Street. I know that's right, because that Who Smoked Your Okra was popping in one fleek last time.
Did she just say fleek?
This is Umu Fofana reporting for 219 West.
That's it for this edition of 219 West.
Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Like dubstep? Like W? Like short for W?
You a dub, like it's over for that. It's over. Yeah,
It's
not happening.
over here.
What does it mean? Like it's not happening.
Okay.
Right.
You know what the word drink means? Drig?
Drid.
Drid?
Yeah.
Drid. No.
It means like being stressed out and like you're just drid. Like if you're something happens to you, like, oh my god, I'm drid. No,
Never heard of it, no.
Okay.
But I'm gonna use it now.
Dread, that means, oh my god, like I'm over it.
Yeah.